3 years ago, she was just a waitress serving coffee. Now she's the mother of my son. And our lives will never be the same. 3 years ago, Mara worked at a small, cozy diner on the corner of a busy street. The kind of place that smelled like fresh coffee and warm bread. Where the regulars were like family, and everyone knew each other's favorite orders. She was young, in her early 20s, with big dreams that seemed far away, and a responsibility heavier than most people her age carried. Mara wasn't just a waitress. She was the one who kept her life and her family together. She worked long hours, sometimes skipping meals, just to make sure her little sister could attend college and their bills were paid on time. Despite her exhaustion, she always carried a smile, welcoming customers as if she truly enjoyed her job. People often noticed her kindness, but few knew the struggles that hid behind those brown eyes and gentle laugh. Every morning, Evan stopped by the diner on his way to work. He was an office employee, quiet and reserved, living a life that had become routine and predictable. His mornings were usually rushed. The alarm, a quick shower, and a cup of coffee he barely tasted as he hurried to the office. Yet the diner had a calmness he hadn't realized he needed. Mara's friendly greeting and the way she remembered his usual order made him feel like more than just another customer passing through. These mornings were the small, unnoticed moments that slowly began to matter more than he expected. Their first conversations were simple, polite exchanges. "Good morning, the usual?" "Sure, coming right up. Nothing extraordinary." But there was something in the way Mara smiled, even when her feet ached from hours of standing, that drew Evan in. He couldn't explain it, but over time, those small interactions started to feel like the best part of his day. Mara, on the other hand, noticed him too. Not just as another customer, but as someone who didn't rush or complain. Someone who quietly appreciated her for what she did. She saw the way he lingered a little longer than others. The way he seemed genuinely interested in the people around him. Life outside the diner was different for both of them. Mara's days were long and tiring, but she carried them with quiet resilience. She had responsibilities that no 20-year-old should have to manage, and yet she handled them with determination. There were moments she felt the weight of it all, when the bills piled up or when her sister called her crying about school stress, but she never let it show in the diner. Mara understood that the world wouldn't wait for her to rest, so she kept moving, kept smiling, kept serving coffee with a cheerfulness that masked the fatigue in her bones. Evan's life was routine but lonely in its own way. Office work was monotonous, the same meetings, the same faces, the same conversations. He came to the diner not just for coffee, but for a glimpse of something warmer, something more human in his otherwise mechanical life. The sound of plates clinking, the aroma of freshly baked bread, and Mara's smile made the early mornings bearable. Slowly, Evan found himself looking forward to these moments, even if he didn't understand why at first. There was comfort and familiarity in the predictability of the diner, and in Mara's presence. Their connection, though unspoken, grew day by day. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. There were no sparks flying, no sudden realization of love. Instead, it was quiet and subtle, a shared laugh over a spilled coffee, a brief conversation about the weather, a smile exchanged when the diner was unusually busy. Both of them were unaware that these small moments were planting seeds of something bigger. For Mara, it was rare to meet someone who seemed genuinely interested in her world. For Evan, it was rare to feel that sense of warmth and acceptance in a life that often felt cold and mechanical. Even the regulars in the diner noticed it. They saw Mara glance a little longer when Evan walked in. They noticed how he lingered a little, watching her work with a quiet attentiveness. People whispered in small ways, offering advice or teasing. But both Mara and Evan were too focused on their own lives to pay much attention. Still, the beginnings of a connection were forming, slow and steady, like water shaping stone. Despite their differences, there was something about the routines they shared that made the morning special. Mara loved the sense of order in her otherwise chaotic life, and Evan found comfort in the consistency. There was a rhythm to it, a smile here, a nod there. The same words spoken at the same time each day that made them feel anchored in a world that often felt unstable. These small interactions, unnoticed by many, were quietly building trust and familiarity. Mara never imagined that the quiet, as a young man who sat by the window every morning, could one day become an important part of her life. And Evan never guessed that the cheerful waitress who handed him coffee each day could affect him in ways he hadn't felt before. Life outside the diner was complicated, filled with pressures and responsibilities, but inside that small corner of the city, a subtle bond was forming. By the end of the first year, Mara and Evan were no longer strangers. They had shared laughter, small conversations, and brief moments of connection that left both of them feeling something they couldn't yet name. The diner, with its smell of coffee and sound of chatter, had become a place of comfort and familiarity. It was in this ordinary, everyday setting that two very different lives began to intersect. Quietly and unknowingly, setting the stage for a future neither of them could have predicted. And so, their story began not with drama or a sudden twist, but with small, simple interactions, coffee served with a smile, polite greetings exchanged, the slow realization that perhaps life could be a little brighter when shared with someone who truly noticed you. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary in its own way. The kind of beginning that often goes unnoticed until years later it becomes clear how significant it really was. One rainy evening, Evan was rushing to the diner as usual, juggling his umbrella and his briefcase, when he realized he had left an important folder at home. The city streets were slick with rain, and the cold drizzle soaked his coat in minutes. Frustrated and wet, he trudged into the diner, hoping the warm light and smell of coffee would at least offer some comfort. Mara was finishing her shift, stacking plates and wiping counters, her hair damp from the rain that had seeped in when she ran outside to bring in supplies. She noticed Evan struggling with his soaked papers and offered a warm smile. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice gentle but curious. Evan nodded, too tired to speak much, but grateful for her attention. She glanced at the folder sticking out of his bag and, without hesitation, offered a solution that would change their relationship forever. "I can give you a ride home," she said. "It's on my way." Evan hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate, but the kindness in her eyes made him accept. They stepped into her small, reliable car, escaping the rain for the first time that day. The warmth of the heater and the faint scent of coffee from the diner created a small, comforting bubble. For the first time, their conversation moved beyond polite greetings and routine chatter. Mara asked him about his work, genuinely interested, while Evan, normally reserved, found himself sharing details he had never voiced to anyone else. He talked about his office, the stress of deadlines, and the monotony of everyday life. Mara listened, offering small comments, nodding, and occasionally laughing at his dry humor. Evan noticed for the first time how attentive she was, how she remembered small details about him from previous conversations. It was different from anything he had experienced before, not just friendliness, but true interest and care. Mara, on her side, felt something stirring inside her. She had met many people during her shifts, most of them polite but fleeting. Evan was different. He didn't treat her like a waitress. He treated her like a person. He noticed the effort behind her smile, the exhaustion behind her laughter. She found herself asking questions about his life, wanting to know more about the man who came in every morning but had remained a mystery until now. Their conversation flowed easily, as if they had known each other longer than just a few short weeks of brief encounters. The ride, which was meant to be only a few minutes, stretched into a full conversation about their lives, their hopes, and even the small disappointments that weighed on them. By the time they arrived at Evan's apartment, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and neither of them wanted the conversation to end. There was a sense of comfort in the silence of the car, in knowing that they were both hearing and being heard. Evan felt a warmth that was unfamiliar, not romantic, at least not yet. What a warmth that suggested he had found someone who understood him in a way he hadn't expected. Mara felt a similar sensation, a rare feeling of connection with someone outside her immediate responsibilities. For both of them, it was a moment of realization. Their lives, which had been separate and ordinary, were beginning to intersect in meaningful ways. After that night, their interactions became more intentional. They began meeting outside the diner initially and casual, short ways a walk in the nearby park after Mara's shift, a coffee at a small cafe on a weekend. Each meeting allowed them to see the other in a different light. Evan saw Mara's determination and strength up close, how she juggled responsibilities with grace, and how she cared deeply about the people in her life. Mara saw Evan's thoughtfulness and reliability, his quiet humor, and the kindness he showed even in small gestures. The routine of their everyday lives became intertwined with moments of connection that felt rare and precious. As weeks passed, these meetings became longer and more meaningful. They shared stories about childhood memories, favorite books, and personal dreams. Evan talked about the travels he wished he could take and the projects he longed to work on, while Mara shared her fears about financial struggles and her hope of giving her sister a better future. In these moments, they discovered a surprising level of compatibility. Their differences, instead of driving them apart, seemed to complement each other. Evan brought stability and calm to Mara's hectic life, while Mara brought energy and warmth to Evan's otherwise structured and predictable routine. They also faced moments of awkwardness. Naturally, as they were still learning to navigate a new type of relationship, there were silences where words failed them. Moments when Mara worried she was imposing on Evan's life, and times when Evan doubted if this connection could last outside the comforting boundaries of the diner and casual meetings. Yet each challenge only made them more aware of the growing bond between them. They started to anticipate each other's needs. Small acts of care becoming common, Evan remembering Mara's favorite snack, Mara noticing when Evan was unusually tired and offering a comforting word or gesture. The first real turning point in their growing connection came one evening when Mara was overwhelmed with work and personal responsibilities. She had been up since early morning, running errands and managing her sister's college paperwork, and she arrived at the diner exhausted. Evan, who had come to check in on her as he had begun doing more frequently, noticed her fatigue immediately. Without a word, he offered to walk her home after her shift. Mara, hesitant at first, agreed. The walk through the quiet, rain-soaked streets became more than just a practical gesture. It became a symbolic moment of trust and support. They talked about their fears, their small victories, and the pressures that had been weighing on them. For the first time, Mara allowed herself to be vulnerable with someone outside her family. And Evan listened with patience and care. By this point, their connection was undeniable. It had grown organically, slowly, without dramatic declarations or overt romance, but with a steady and genuine presence in each other's lives. Both began to notice that their thoughts often drifted to the other during moments apart. Evan found himself looking forward to Mara's text messages or her smile at the diner, and Mara felt a sense of relief and comfort when Evan's presence was near. This was not a whirlwind romance, but a careful, deliberate building of trust and friendship, the foundation of something lasting. Their growing closeness also had an impact on how they viewed their own lives. Mara felt a spark of hope that she hadn't felt in years, realizing that she could have someone by her side who would support her, not just tolerate her struggles. Evan, who had been trapped in a routine that felt monotonous, realized that life could be warmer, richer, and more meaningful when shared with someone who truly cared. Each of their interactions, whether small or significant, began to change how they approached their daily lives, making the ordinary feel extraordinary as the weeks turned into months. Mara and Evan began to consider what this connection meant. There were no grand declarations yet, but there was an unspoken understanding. They had become important to each other in ways neither of them expected. They continued their routines, Mara working at the diner, Evan heading to the office. But the moments in between, the car rides, the walks, the shared coffee, had become anchors in their lives. The small gestures, the kind words, and the simple act of being present for each other were slowly transforming a casual acquaintance into a meaningful, life-altering bond by the end of this period. What started as a random ride home in the rain had become a turning point in their lives. It was the moment that shifted their relationship from routine politeness to genuine care and interest. Both Mara and Evan began to see that perhaps life had a way of bringing people together at the right moment, even when neither was expecting it. What was once just a small connection over coffee and brief conversations had begun to blossom into a relationship rooted in trust. respect, and a quiet but undeniable affection that neither of them had anticipated. Their story, still in its early stages, had moved from chance meetings to intentional closeness. It was a beginning built not on dramatic events but on small, sincere moments that revealed who they truly were and what they needed in life. Mara and Evan were no longer just a waitress and a customer. They had become two people slowly discovering each other. Two lives beginning to intertwine in ways that would change their futures forever. Life, as it often does, didn't wait for Mara and Evan to get comfortable in their newfound connection. After months of small moments that had slowly intertwined their lives, reality began to creep in with pressures neither of them could ignore. Mara's mother fell ill unexpectedly. It started as mild fatigue and occasional dizziness, but soon it became clear that she needed constant care. Mara was torn. Her shifts at the diner were already long and grueling, but now she had to figure out how to balance work with tending to her mother and making sure her work. Sister's college responsibilities didn't slip through the cracks. She felt exhausted and pulled in every direction. Evan tried to support her as much as he could, offering help and listening whenever she needed to vent. But even he could see the toll it was taking. The bright, lively energy that Mara usually carried had dimmed under the weight of her new responsibilities. And he felt powerless at times to do anything more than offer a comforting word or a shoulder to lean on at the same time. Evan's own life began to unravel in ways he hadn't expected. The company he worked for went through a sudden round of layoffs. Though he was not immediately affected, the fear of losing his job, combined with the added stress of long hours and constant uncertainty, began to wear on him. The office he once tolerated as routine now felt suffocating, filled with tension and worry. The combination of stress and fatigue started to affect his mood and his patience, and he found it harder to stay fully present when he was with Mara. They had grown so used to being each other's safe space that now, with both of their lives under pressure, even small interactions became more difficult. For Mara, the stress of her mother's illness and managing her sister's life meant that she had less time to think about her own needs. She sometimes skipped meals, neglected her own rest, and pushed herself past exhaustion. On some nights, she would sit alone in her small apartment after a 12-hour shift, staring at her hands and wondering if she could handle everything. Evan noticed these moments, and it worried him deeply. He wanted to help, but he realized that Mara had been carrying responsibilities far heavier than he had ever imagined. He tried to step in where he could, helping with groceries, checking in regularly, even offering to accompany her to appointments, but it was clear that Mara needed to make choices about her own priorities, and that meant she couldn't always be available to him. The pressures of life began to test their bond. They started arguing more often, small disagreements growing into heated discussions. Mara felt frustrated that Evan sometimes didn't understand the full extent of her responsibilities. Evan felt frustrated that Mara seemed to push him away even when he was trying to help. They didn't stop caring for each other, but stress and exhaustion created a tension neither of them had experienced before. Their once easy conversations became punctuated with misunderstandings and moments of hurt. They began to question whether their connection, which had been so gentle and reassuring, could survive the growing pressures around them then. Just when the stress seemed overwhelming, Mara discovered she was pregnant. It was a moment that brought a mix of fear, uncertainty, and awe. She was overwhelmed at first. She hadn't planned for a child, and with all the responsibilities she already carried, it seemed impossible to imagine adding another life to care for. The thought of telling Evan filled her with both hope and anxiety. Would he be supportive? Would this change everything between them? She paced her apartment, tears flowing freely as she contemplated the future, realizing that no matter how uncertain or frightening it seemed, she would have to face it when Mara finally told Evan. It was one of the most significant moments of their lives. She was nervous, her voice trembling as she explained, unsure of how he would react. But Evan, after the initial shock, responded with a calm that surprised both of them. He didn't panic, didn't blame her or himself. Instead, he listened carefully, asked questions gently, and reassured her that they would face this together. In that moment, the arguments, the exhaustion, and the stress seemed to fade slightly, replaced by a shared understanding that this new chapter required courage and cooperation, they began to navigate the practical realities of the pregnancy together. Doctor appointments, medical advice, and planning for the future became their new focus. For Mara, it was exhausting, but also a strange relief. She had feared facing this alone, but Evan's presence and commitment gave her strength. He began to understand the gravity of her daily struggles in a way that went beyond casual support. He was now fully invested in the life growing inside her, and in her life as well. Their relationship, which had been tested by stress and distance, began to deepen in ways neither of them had anticipated. At the same time, the pregnancy forced both of them to confront their own personal challenges. Mara had to acknowledge that she couldn't do everything alone, that it was okay to lean on Evan and accept help. Evan had to confront his own fears about responsibility, financial stability, and how to be a partner and future parent. Both realized that love was no longer just about enjoying each other's company or sharing laughs. It was about commitment, support, and facing life's difficulties together, even with their growing commitment. Challenges persisted. Mara's mother's health fluctuated, sometimes requiring urgent attention and adding stress to their already complicated lives. Evan had to navigate job uncertainties and the pressure of providing for a family he had not anticipated so soon. Yet amid the chaos, moments of joy and tenderness continued to emerge. They celebrated small victories, a good doctor's visit, a day when Mara felt less tired, a quiet evening together without interruptions. These moments became lifelines, reminders of why they had connected in the first place and what they were working to preserve. Emotionally, the pregnancy created a bond that was difficult to describe. Both Mara and Evan felt a mixture of fear, responsibility, and excitement. They began to dream in small ways about the life they could build together, imagining their child's future and the family they could create. These dreams were tempered by reality, but they also provided hope, a guiding light amid the stress and exhaustion. They started making plans for their home, discussing values, and thinking about how to support each other and their growing family. By the end of this period, both Mara and Evan had undergone significant personal growth. Mara had learned to accept help and recognize her own limits, while Evan had learned to step up, communicate, and face responsibilities he had previously avoided. Their connection, once easy and light, had transformed into something deeper and more meaningful. It was no longer just about shared smiles and casual conversations. It was about trust, resilience, and partnership. They had faced their first major challenge together and had come through it, still standing side by side. In many ways, this time of trials solidified the foundation of their relationship. They had learned to navigate conflict, support each other through stress, and face the unknown together. The challenges were far from over, but they had proven to themselves that they could handle life's unpredictability as a team. The pregnancy, while initially frightening, became a catalyst for growth, forcing both Mara and Evan to confront fears, make difficult choices, and deepen their commitment to each other. By the time Mara's pregnancy progressed, their relationship had shifted from uncertainty to a cautious but determined hope. They knew life would continue to be challenging, but they also knew that they would not face it alone. The connection that had begun as small moments of kindness and casual conversation had transformed into a partnership, capable of weathering life's storms. Both Mara and Evan were learning not only about each other, but about themselves, their capacity for patience, love, and resilience. This period marked a turning point. It was no longer just about attraction or comfort. It was about responsibility, shared goals, and building a future together. The stress, arguments, and fear had tested them. But it had also strengthened their bond, preparing them for the next chapter of their lives, one that would bring even greater challenges and, ultimately, a new life that would change everything. After the initial shock of discovering Mara was pregnant, both she and Evan slowly began to navigate the new reality of their lives together. It was not easy, and there were moments of fear and doubt, but with each passing day, they learned how to support each other in ways they had never imagined. Mara, who had been used to handling everything on her own, began to realize that it was okay to rely on someone else. Evan, who had previously struggled with taking responsibility beyond his own life, found himself stepping up in ways that surprised even him. The pregnancy became a catalyst, not just for change, but for growth, for both of them. The first step was communication. They realized that to face what was ahead, they had to be honest with each other about their fears, their limitations, and their expectations. Mara shared the stresses she felt with her mother's health and her sister's schooling, while Evan opened up about the uncertainty he faced in his job and the pressure he felt to provide for a family he hadn't anticipated. At first, these conversations were tense. Emotions ran high, and both of them occasionally said things they later regretted. But slowly, with patience, they began to listen to each other without judgment. They started to speak not only about problems, but also about hopes and dreams. And they discovered that their goals were aligned in many ways. Evan took practical steps to stabilize their future. He looked for a new job that offered more security and better income, knowing that Mara could not carry the financial burden alone. Nights that were once spent relaxing in front of the TV or scrolling through social media were now spent researching job openings, updating resumes, and preparing for interviews. Mara noticed his dedication, and it reassured her that they were truly a team. She, in turn, focused on managing her health and making sure she was prepared for the pregnancy. She cut back on extra shifts at the diner, choosing to prioritize rest and prenatal care. Although it was financially challenging, she knew that her well-being and the baby's health were the most important things. Their routines began to revolve around preparation for the baby, and even the simplest tasks took on a new meaning. Grocery shopping became an adventure as they learned what foods were safest for pregnancy and which items they would need once the baby arrived. Trips to the doctor's office became shared experiences, filled with questions, excitement, and sometimes laughter at the unexpected moments of pregnancy, the cravings, the mood swings, the way Mara's belly began to grow. Each milestone brought them closer, building a sense of shared responsibility and connection that was deeper than anything they had felt before. Mara's family gradually became involved as well. At first, her mother and sister were skeptical of Evan's ability to support Mara, but as they saw his consistent efforts, their skepticism turned into cautious trust. They observed how he made Mara feel seen, how he contributed to planning for the baby, and how he handled stress without abandoning responsibility. This slowly built a supportive environment around them, easing some of the pressure they both carried. Mara, too, learned to accept help from her family, something she had resisted before. She realized that strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to lean on others and who to trust. Emotionally, this period was a roller coaster. There were days when Mara felt overwhelmed by nausea, fatigue, or worry, and Evan was there to hold her hand, make her favorite foods, or simply listen when she needed to vent. There were days when Evan felt the weight of financial responsibility, job uncertainty, and the fear of becoming a father. And Mara provided reassurance, encouragement, and practical support. The partnership they had built was being tested constantly, but these challenges also allowed them to discover strengths they hadn't recognized in themselves or each other. They also began to discuss their future in more concrete terms. Conversations about where they would live, how they would manage finances, and what kind of parents they wanted to be were no longer hypothetical. They made lists, set goals, and even researched parenting books together. They shared dreams of family traditions, of the values they hoped to instill in their child, and of how they would support each other in moments of difficulty. The process was exhausting at times, but it also filled them with a sense of purpose and anticipation. The shared vision of a future together became a motivating force that carried them through tough days, even in mundane moments. Their bond strengthened. Simple acts, like Evan massaging Mara's tired feet after a long day, or Mara preparing his favorite coffee in the morning, became gestures of love and care that deepened their connection. They laughed at small mishaps, like Evan accidentally buying the wrong prenatal vitamins, or Mara spilling soup while trying to cook a healthy meal. These moments, ordinary on the surface, were the building blocks of a relationship rooted in real-life challenges and shared responsibility. They were learning not just to survive, but to thrive together, finding joy in everyday life, even amid difficulties. Their relationship also grew emotionally. Through the anticipation of their child, feeling the first kicks, hearing the heartbeat for the first time, and seeing the ultrasound images were experiences that bonded them in ways they hadn't imagined. Evan, once hesitant about the future, found himself speaking to the baby, making promises he intended to keep, and imagining the life they would build together. Mara, who had been worried about facing this alone, felt comforted by Evan's presence, realizing that they were truly partners in this journey. Each prenatal milestone was a reminder of why the challenges were worth it, and reinforced the importance of their shared commitment. As the pregnancy progressed, Mara and Evan began to prepare their home for the baby. They rearranged rooms, bought baby clothes, cribs, and other essentials. Every decision, from paint color to the layout of the nursery, became a joint effort. They discussed the type of parenting style they hoped to adopt, the routines they would follow, and the values they wanted to pass on. These discussions sometimes sparked disagreements, but even then they learned to negotiate, compromise, and prioritize the well-being of both Mara and the baby. Through this process, they discovered how capable they were of working together as a team. Even under stress, alongside the practical preparations, their emotional connection deepened in subtle ways. Mara began to trust Evan completely, sharing her fears, her hopes, and even her small daily frustrations. Evan became more open with his feelings, admitting insecurities he had never shared before and expressing hopes for their family. They began to understand each other not only as partners, but as individuals with dreams, fears, and histories that shaped who they were. This mutual understanding created a foundation of empathy, respect, and love that would carry them into parenthood. By the end of this period, both Mara and Evan had transformed. Mara, once overwhelmed and hesitant, had embraced the help and support around her, learning to balance responsibility with self-care. Evan, once reserved and unsure, had stepped fully into the role of partner and future father, proving his commitment through actions and presence. Together, they had faced uncertainty, stress, and fear, and had come through stronger, closer, and more prepared for the challenges ahead. The arrival of their child, though still months away, had already changed how they lived, thought, and felt. Their connection had shifted from a tentative friendship to a deep, committed partnership built on trust, communication, and shared responsibility. They had learned that life was unpredictable and often difficult, but that facing it together made the journey possible and even meaningful. This period of rebuilding and preparation had laid the groundwork for the family they were about to become, showing them that love was not just about feelings, but about effort, sacrifice, and unwavering support. Through these months, Mara and Evan discovered a new rhythm to life. It was not perfect, and there were moments of exhaustion, frustration, and fear. But there were also moments of laughter, tenderness, and hope. The challenges had strengthened their bond, prepared them for parenthood, and revealed their capacity to grow as individuals and as a couple. They were ready as anyone could be, to face the next chapter of life, the arrival of their child, and the beginning of a family that was built on love, trust, and shared determination. The day their son was born was unlike anything Mara and Evan had ever experienced. It began quietly, with Mara feeling the first early contractions, a gentle but insistent reminder that their lives were about to change forever. The months of preparation, the late-night discussions, the small moments of doubt and joy, all led to this instant. Evan stayed close, holding her hand and offering encouragement, though inside he felt a mix of nervousness and awe. He had watched Mara face challenges before, but this was different. He realized that soon they would be responsible not just for themselves, but for a tiny, fragile human being who would depend on them completely. The hospital was a whirlwind of activity. Nurses moved efficiently, machines beeped steadily, and doctors prepared for the birth with practiced calm. Mara focused on Evan's presence, finding strength in his steady voice and reassuring touch. The contractions became more intense, and Evan whispered words of encouragement, reminding her to breathe and that she wasn't alone. He felt a sense of helplessness, too, knowing he could not take away her pain, but he also felt pride and love beyond measure. Each moment brought them closer, as if the shared experience of labor was forming a bond stronger than anything they had known before. Finally, after hours of labor, their son entered the world. The room filled with the newborn's cry, a sound that seemed to echo through both their hearts. Tears streamed down Mara's face, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and overwhelming love. Evan's eyes were wet as well. He reached for their son, holding him gently, afraid to break such a perfect, tiny being. In that moment, all the challenges, fears, and uncertainties of the past months melted away. Their focus narrowed to this small life in their hands, in a deep, unspoken promise formed between them to protect, nurture, and love this child no matter what. Naming their son became a shared moment of reflection and emotion. They wanted a name that would carry meaning, a name that honored the journey that had brought them together. They finally settled on Noah, a name that symbolized hope, new beginnings, and the enduring strength of family. Holding him close, Mara felt a warmth she had never experienced before. She realized that the little human in her arms was the embodiment of everything she had worked for and dreamed of: love, family, and a future worth striving for. Evan, equally moved, promised silently to be the father his son deserved, to support Mara, and to embrace the life they were building together in the days that followed. The adjustment to life with a newborn tested both Mara and Evan in new ways. Sleep was scarce, and the demands of caring for an infant were relentless. Yet even in the exhaustion, there were moments of profound joy. Watching Noah's tiny fingers curl around theirs, seeing him respond to sounds and touch, and witnessing his first expressions brought laughter and awe to both Mara and Evan. Every diaper changed, every feed given, every late-night lullaby sung, was a small act of love that strengthened their bond as partners and as a family. Evan adapted quickly to the responsibilities of fatherhood, learning the rhythms of their son's needs, anticipating cries, and offering comfort. Mara, once nervous about being a mother, found her instincts guiding her. She discovered a resilience she hadn't known she possessed, balancing the physical demands of recovery with the emotional demands of caring for Noah. Together, they developed routines that worked for them, dividing tasks, supporting one another, and finding joy even in the most mundane moments of parenting. Family and friends rallied around them, offering support and sharing in their happiness. Mara's mother, whose health had gradually improved, visited often, providing help and guidance. Evan's parents became involved as well, offering advice and encouragement, and celebrating the arrival of their grandson. These interactions reinforced a sense of community, showing Mara and Evan that family extended beyond just the two of them and their son. It was a network of love and support that strengthened their ability to face challenges together. Emotionally, Mara and Evan underwent a profound transformation. Their relationship, once defined by small gestures and casual connections, now rested on shared responsibility and deep love. They had learned patience, empathy, and compromise. They had discovered that partnership was about more than affection. It was about showing up, even when it was difficult. Each moment with their son reinforced their commitment to each other, reminding them why they had persevered through the challenges of the past 3 years. Parenthood also brought them closer in ways they had never anticipated. They laughed together at Noah's first giggles, marveled at his first steps, and celebrated each milestone as a team. The small, everyday victories became sources of pride and joy, reinforcing the bond that had begun so quietly in a diner years ago. They learned to communicate without words, understanding each other's needs, moods, and concerns through gestures, expressions, and shared glances. The rhythm of life with their child created a harmony that carried them through sleepless nights, stressful days, and moments of uncertainty. As time passed, Mara reflected on her journey from being a young waitress struggling to make ends meet to becoming a mother of a child she adored. She recognized the growth in herself, her strength, her patience, her capacity for love. She had faced challenges she had once thought insurmountable and had come through stronger, supported by a partner who had proven himself reliable, loving, and committed. She no longer felt alone in the world. Together with Evan and Noah, she had built a small but resilient family. Evan, too, reflected on the changes in his life. He had started as a quiet, reserved man whose world was defined by routine. Through his relationship with Mara, the challenges they faced, and the birth of their son, he had grown into a man capable of love, responsibility, and emotional openness. He had discovered that strength was not just about stability or work, but about showing care, empathy, and commitment to the people who mattered most. He understood that family was not just a word but a daily practice, demonstrated through actions, patience, and presence. Their journey together taught them valuable lessons about resilience, hope, and love. They had begun as two individuals whose lives briefly intersected over coffee and polite greetings. But through shared experiences, challenges, and growth, they had become a family. The birth of Noah symbolized the culmination of that journey, a living reminder of the choices they had made, the hardships they had endured, and the love that had carried them through, even as they faced the ongoing challenges of parenting, sleepless nights, teething, balancing work and family life. Mara and Evan remained grounded in the knowledge that they were partners. They had learned to face life together, supporting each other through every trial, celebrating every success, and finding joy in the ordinary moments that made life meaningful. Noah's presence brought purpose, connection, and a new sense of identity to both of them. Looking back, Mara realized that the waitress she had been 3 years ago and the woman she had become were connected not just by circumstance, but by choice. She had chosen to persevere, to accept love and support, and to embrace the unexpected changes in her life. Evan recognized the same in himself, that his path had changed because he chose to be present, to care deeply, and to face life with courage and commitment. Together, they had turned ordinary moments into a story of resilience, love, and family. The small diner where they first met seemed like a distant memory, yet it remained significant. It was where a simple greeting had grown into connection, trust, and eventually life-changing love. Every cup of coffee, every shared smile, and every mundane interaction had been the beginning of a journey that led to Noah, their son, and the family they were now building together. In the end, Mara and Evan understood that life was unpredictable, full of challenges and surprises. Yet, it was in facing these challenges together, in embracing the unexpected, and in supporting one another through thick and thin, that they had discovered the true meaning of love and family. Their son Noah became the living proof of their journey, a constant reminder that even ordinary beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes. The days that followed were filled with growth, love, and learning. Every day brought new experiences, lessons, and joys. Mara and Evan found fulfillment in watching their son develop, experiencing the world anew through his eyes, and cherishing the bond they had formed as a family. They had started as strangers, connected by chance, and had become parents, partners, and a family united by love, resilience, and shared dreams. Through it all, they knew that life would continue to bring challenges. But they also knew that together, they could face anything. The birth of their son marked the start of a new chapter, one full of hope, commitment, and the promise of a lifetime of shared memories, laughter, and love. Their story had transformed from small, ordinary beginnings into something profound, reminding them that even the most unexpected connections can change lives forever.